What's going on, guys? Jeff here from the Hookup Tackle. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic swim bait of all time, and that is, of course, the Huddleston Deluxe swim bait. So if you guys are ready, let's get right into today's video.
Welcome to the Hookup Tackle. The Hookup Tackle is the world's largest showcase of megabass products, featuring baits and colors not found at any other dealer. The Hookup also offers a wide display of OSP, Evergreen, Depths, Lucky Craft, Jackal, and many more. The Hookup Tackle is owned and operated by family, is staffed by guides and verified tackle nerds who love helping anglers elevate their craft. If you're in the Phoenix area, we'd love to have you stop by our showroom and check out the wonderful world of megabass and the Hookup for yourself. If you shop online, there are almost 10,000 SKUs of megabass products alone, with hundreds of other companies and new products being added daily. So next time you're looking for that hard to find bait, that color your fish have never seen before, or maybe you just want to elevate your game, look at thehookuptackle.com.
So swim bait fishing has been around since the early 1990s, and it was kind of started in California with some old school style swim baits made from Optimum as well as Castaic, and those were kind of the OG swim baits, as well as like the AC plug. Those swim baits defined a lot of the 1990s California swim bait craze that was happening, and a lot of people didn't really know what was going on out there, but guys were catching absolute giant bass back then on just these soft plastic baits that were really big, that imitated the trout that were getting stocked on the regular in some of those Southern California lakes. And so throughout the 1990s into the early 2000s, the big names were obviously Optimum, Castaic, AC Plug, and Jerry Rago started to also make some of his baits back then too. It wasn't until 2005 where the swim bait game completely changed, and it hasn't looked back ever since. In 2005, Ken Huddleston came out with this bait, and that is the 8-inch Huddleston Deluxe swim bait. Now, everybody probably in bass fishing history knows and has heard about the Huddleston Deluxe swim bait, and for good reason. Ever since the first release of the Huddleston, I'd probably say the Huddleston probably has the most amount of giant bass caught on any soft swim bait out there on the market to this day. I mean, from its first release, one of the guys, you guys might know who he is, picked up quite a lot of those Huddlestons on the very first run, and his name was Butch Brown. I believe he said he probably bought 80% of the first run of 8-inch Huddlestons back in 2005. And what Butch did is he went to his lake that everybody has seen him fish on, and he started to catch absolute giant bags. Not just one or two fish, but absolute bags of giant bass caught on the 8-inch Huddleston. And he kind of kept it on the low, what he was doing, for a while. And I remember he was talking to like Ken, and Ken was like, yo, you need to start like filming some of these catches, because people are just not going to believe you. Like, you're catching 40, 50 pound bags, like it seems like every time you go out there on the Huddleston. So you should probably get like a camcorder and start filming and documenting these catches. And of course, that's what he did. And we all have seen a lot of those footage of Butch Brown catching giant bags. I mean, he caught a 65 pound bag on an 8-inch Huddleston. Like, that blows my mind. I can't imagine catching a 40 pound bag. Like, that's ridiculous. All on just an 8-inch Huddleston. So news spread about the 8-inch Huddleston and its popularity. At the time, if you compared this bait to some of the original trout swim baits back then, this was incredibly realistic. This was the most lifelike swim bait ever made at the time. I mean, in today's day and age, it still holds up as a very realistic trout profile. It's got fins on it. The fins protrude from the bait. It's got nice eyes. The profile is perfect. Like, this back then was the perfect soft swim bait. Nowadays, it still holds up as one of the most realistic trout swim baits out there on the market. With that, I mean, you think about some of those old Optimum boot tail style swim baits and like the Casteaks, like the hard heads. That was something completely different. You can slow roll it on the bottom without it getting hung up in the rocks so much, and it just flat out fooled the fish incredibly. How I compare it is how the Depths 250, which came to light quite a few years later, gave kind of the same effect, where if a big fish saw this bait, it is just going to crush it. It is going to crush it, and there's going to be other big fish trying to eat this thing too. Like, it was insane. I mean, I've seen so many of Butch Brown's videos, and it just looks ridiculous. I mean, a true fish catching machine. Nowadays, everybody knows about the Huddleston. Ken doesn't just make the 8-inch Huddleston. He makes quite a wide variety of different baits. A very, very popular one, besides the 8-inch, is actually the Hud 68. The Hud 68 is pretty much his 6-inch Huddleston, but it has the tail of an 8-inch Huddleston. So it's got a smaller profile, but it still gives off the strong kick that the 8-inch Huddleston gave off. And honestly, I think it's a sleeper bait. A lot of guys actually catch really giant fish on that 68 from what I've heard, but they kind of keep it hush, so more guys don't really get it. But the Hud 68, again, another absolute staple, a classic. It's a killer for a lot of guys. It's the right size. You can fish this really anywhere in the country, in the world, and you're gonna get bit on it. It's just got such a great tail kick on it as well. Great profile and size. You just can't go wrong with the Hud 68. And then a few years ago, Ken finally came out with a much bigger profile, and he made the 10-inch Huddleston. Quite a bit bigger of a bait. It's a lot heavier, thicker, gives off an even greater tail kick than just the 8-inch Huddleston. And when the 10-inch Huddleston first kind of came out, I definitely liked it over the regular 8-inch Huddleston. And the reason for that is everybody and their grandmothers has an 8-inch Huddleston nowadays, and they were fishing it. And yes, it gets bit, but after so long of fishing it and the fish seeing it, they kind of start to realize, like, okay, this thing is fake. Not all the time, but you definitely started to see less bites and less fish caught on the 8-inch Huddleston. So I decided I wanted to fish something even bigger. And that's when the 10-inch Huddleston kind of caught my eye. And I started fishing it around, and I think it was like my third trip with it. I had a fish completely just choke this bait.
Catch it out. Just catch the back of the boat. That's a fish. She's chopping it. Catapult midnight. Fucking funny. Speed up, speed up. Just get thumped, dude. That'd be insane. I'd break. I'm 10 and 5. Oh, no! I just got smashed, dude.
Did you really?
Yeah, I just got freaking wrecked.
What the fuck?
I just got wrecked, dude.
Really?
I just got freaking wrecked.
No way.
My drag was loose.
No way.
Hell, dude.
No way.
I just got. Got him, dude. I got him.
You got him?
I got him. I got him.
Keep it down, dude. Keep it down. Keep it down. Keep it down. Keep it down.
I got him, dude. I got him.
Keep it down.
I got him. I got him. Oh, here she comes. Oh, she choked it, dude. She choked it. Oh my god.
She choked it, dude.
She.
How
Dude,
long
I
did she
told you I
have
got
it?
smoked it, dude.
How long did she have it?
Not long, dude. Dude, I told you I got
Dude,
smoked.
She choked.
I told you I got smoked, dude.
So Huddleston makes quite a few different sizes, but today we're really just gonna talk about the universal size, the 8-inch Huddleston. So we're just gonna be talking about, you know, how to fish it, modifications, and just the overall fishiness of this bait. Let's just start with how I like to fish my Huddlestons, how a lot of guys like to fish Huddlestons. But to kind of get into that, we have to understand that there are 4 different rate of fall Huddlestons out there. Meaning there is a ROF 0, ROF 5, ROF 12, and a ROF 16. What that number means is how many feet your bait's gonna sink every 10 seconds. So the ROF 0 is obviously a floater. The raw 5 sinks 5 feet every 10 seconds, 12 feet every 10 seconds, 16 feet every 10 seconds. So all that means is in the internal of the bait of the harness, there's a weight down here at the bottom. Now in the raw 5, it's got a smaller weight, 12 it's got a bigger weight, and 16 has a bigger weight. What that means is if you're trying to get down fast to the bottom in 40 plus feet of water, you would think that you would want to get like a ROF 12 or a ROF 16. The only problem with that ROF 12 and that ROF 16, since there is so much weight up here in the head, is when you're down there on the bottom, and especially if you're working it uphill or you're around a lot of those rocks, what happens is the bait is nose down like this, and since there's so much weight, it can't bounce over the rock. It's like wedged in here. So you end up having to go all the way around, try and pop it free, and then make that recast. And you're gonna waste a lot of time. You're gonna get really, really frustrated on how many times you will end up snagging your bait. So if you're fishing around bigger boulders, trees, coming uphill, and there's just a bunch of nasty stuff down there, I don't necessarily recommend you get a ROF 12 or ROF 16. You're probably going to end up, you're not gonna snag the hooks necessarily, but the weight of the head is just gonna make that head lodge into a rock, and you're just gonna get super frustrated when you make a bomb cast. You let it sink down into the bottom, and you start working, and it's like, oh crap. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And then you have to go over there. You might blow out the spot that there might have been some big fish on it. So I recommend you get a ROF 5 Huddleston. A lot of times I will just fish it stock. Now a lot of guys, sometimes even including myself, we will try and make it like a ROF 8, like a 7 or an 8. So it's not as fast as 12, but we're able to get it down to the bottom. And when you have that slower ROF, what happens is when you're coming along and you have, like, let's just say the standard 5, it's not going to be so dredging on the bottom, but it's going to kind of have a little bit of a nose up. And so when you hit that rock, it's going to bounce over. And you can just bounce over, just because that weight isn't dragging it down. To where if the weight was too heavy, it won't be able to bounce. It's just too heavy. That 5 is so light, and you're kind of pulling up on it, is when it hits that rock, it just and then comes right over. So that's why a lot of guys have been going over to the 5, even to the 0, and what a lot of guys are doing is they are just putting nail weights in the bait. Now they make so many different sizes in the nail weights. I go with like an 8 ounce or a 3/32 ounce, 1/16 ounce. Like, there's just a lot of different sizes. It depends on the ROF that you want to go with. I've been just going with the 8 ounce. And what I do is I just pretty much run them up here on the bottom, going up through the cheeks. And what that does is it weights it down, but it's not like a 12 where it's just down to the bottom. Where a ROF 5 is kind of like this, where it kind of comes down. And then you kind of find that middle ground. So you're able to fish the bait a little bit faster on the bottom, still maintaining that bottom contact, which is super important. And you're also not having to wait so long to fire out the bait and wait for it to sink down to your desired depth, 40, 50, even maybe 60 foot of water. And of course, the big one is just it coming through that nasty cover where a lot of those big fish want a bait presented. So having that lighter bait is going to get you through cover. It's going to save you a lot of time and headache. And of course, if you wanted to super weight it down to 12, if you're fishing around, you know, more of a light gravelly bottom, or if it's like a mud or sand kind of bottom, then absolutely you can dredge it with, you know, throw some heavier weights in there to get it to sink like a ROF 10 or a 12. Just shove them in there. You can throw them even in the back, and it's going to weight that thing down there. That's kind of one of the biggest things about the Huddleston, is you definitely want to try and find the lighter ones. Like, I think right now we don't have many more of the lighter ones. You can get a ROF 0, but I've heard that for some weird odd reason, the ROF 0s, even though you throw those nail weights in them, they don't swim as good as just a standard 5. So, but they still swim pretty good. A lot of guys like that ROF Zero. Unfortunately, back in the day, down here on the bottom of the bait, there actually used to be a hook hanger. And what guys would do is they would just attach like a treble right here in the fin, so when you have that ROF Zero, you can creep it right on top of the surface, just real slow. And a lot of dudes have caught in some really giant fish doing it that way. But for some odd reason, Ken literally took away that hook hanger, so now it's kind of impossible to get a good hookup on fish if you're fishing it near the surface and a fish comes up from underneath and hits it like this. Even if you have a treble up here on the top, it's going to be fairly hard to get them to get hooked. You will have a much better shot if it's down here. Again, for some reason, Ken just decided to take it away. I don't know. You have to talk to him about that if you can even get into contact with him. So a lot of guys, they are always fiending to try and find some of those OG ROF Zeros that have that hook hanger on the bottom. So if you can find them, grab them, keep on to them. They're actually kind of rare these days. So that's kind of the explanation of the ROFs. So how I like to fish it is kind of like I said, it's either I pull up to like main lake point, or if I'm on like a flat that's got like some rock on it that drops off into deep water, I'm going to be first fishing that flat with the rock on it. If they're not there, I'm going to make an even further cast out into that deeper water. I'm going to let my bait sink down to 40 feet. I'm going to fish it uphill until I get up onto that flat and then get to that rock pile and then fish it from there. So again, there's many different ways you can fish the Huddleston. You can fish it on top of the water. You can fish it down at the bottom. You can also fish it around docks as well, where if you guys have ever watched Southern Trout Eaters, a lot of those big fish that those guys were catching on that lake out there, they were catching them on, I believe, like a ROF Zero or a ROF 5. They had a bunch of treble hooks down on the bottom, and they were just fishing them right around the docks. Again, you can't do that nowadays unless you figure out how to rig your own hook hanger on the bottom of some of those ROF Zeros. Other than that, I do not really recommend you try it. You'll probably hook some fish for sure, but you might miss some key bites doing that as well. Now, the setup that I'm fishing, like just a standard 8-inch Huddleston, I'm normally fishing 8 foot, 8'3", extra heavy swim bait rod, something that will load the bait really well, but it still has that backbone, just because sometimes you are fishing down in that 40 foot of water and you get bit, you got to really jack that fish super hard. I'm looking for maybe a little less parabolic, a little more backbone, so I can really drive the hook home. Where if I'm fishing like a treble hook bait, I want something a little more parabolic so I don't rip the trebles out of the fish's mouth. But a lot of times when you're fishing a bait down there on the bottom, what happens when you get bit is the fish comes up, folds it, and it's in their mouth. So you need to drive whatever hook that is right in the mouth, you know. So it's not like sometimes on the hard bait they'll just T-bone it, and if you swing too hard and your rod doesn't load well, just rip out. So you definitely want something that's got a little bit stiffer of a backbone, but you still want some type of tip, so you know that you're down there on the bottom, it's somewhat sensitive. And then when you get bit, if it's too stiff of a rod, what's going to happen is when you get bit, if it's too stiff, that rod won't load that bite and the bait might just come out of its mouth. And what you want to do with these soft baits is when you get bit is you want to reel up as much of that slack, as much of that stretch as you possibly can, and then hit them. So when you feel that thump, reel, like a quick little reel check, and then hit them. But if your rod's too stiff, it might not absorb that eat, and it might just be gone before you even can really reel down and hit that fish. So something a little bit softer of a tip, but a lot of backbone will go a long way when it comes down to fishing the Huddleston. The reel, I like a slower gear ratio reel, anything from that 5-to-1 up to maybe like a 6-4-to-1. But that's about it. Any bit faster, you're going to be fishing that thing a little too fast on the bottom. You might hit the bottom with the bait, but then if you're working it too fast, it might rise up and you're like, wait, am I on the bottom? Oh, I'm not. you know, and then you have to like, you just messed up the whole cast because now your bait's doing this in the water. It doesn't look that natural. So I fished mine on a Shimano Calcutta Conquest. I fished it on a 400. I fished a Shimano Cardiff 300 as well. A 300 size reel will do just fine. 400 as well will do just fine. But something that's a little bit slower, I prefer the round reel. But I know that they make some of these low profile reels in a slower gear ratio as well. The Tranx is probably the most popular one that I know a lot of guys like to fish in that slow gear ratio reel. I just like the spool on the round reels. I feel like you can hold a lot more line on there just because sometimes I am fishing, you know, casting out into 60 foot of water and I'm long lining. I'm, you know, practically trying to spool myself to get as long as of a cast as I possibly can, and that round reel holds just enough line on there. Now the line that I'm fishing with is 20 pound fluorocarbon. It's not that heavy of a bait, it's like 4 ounces, so I don't feel like I really need to bump up my line. 20 pound will handle the Huddleston just fine. And what that line does is the fluorocarbon, it sinks, 1. 2, it has a little less stretch obviously than mono, so when you do try and hit them down there in 40 foot, there's less stretch, so your connection, your hook set, it's going to be a lot harder since there's a lot less stretch in the line. I recommend the fluorocarbon. You can obviously bump up to 25 pound if you're fishing like super nasty stuff, but if you want the most natural looking presentation, if you guys are fishing, you know, fairly clear water and you're really trying to fool some of those really giant bass, go down to 20 pound, you might surprise yourself with it. Now a lot of guys throughout the years have rigged the Huddleston 1,000 different ways, and when I first got my 8-inch Huddleston, I remember I cut off the jig hook and I tried the Butch Brown rig. If you guys don't know what the Butch Brown rig is, I will leave a link to the Butch's video on how he likes to do the Butch Brown rig. You guys can check that out. For some reason, I didn't really like it that much. I found a lot of the fish that I fished for, they actually kind of just come up from behind and just get like half of it, and then they throw it back. So what I did is I took off the Butch Brown rig and then I rigged the stinger back here. Again, I cut off the jig hook and I put a stinger back here behind this dorsal fin, and I fished it that way. I thought it was just fine. Nowadays, I've kind of just said screw all that. I actually leave the jig hook on there just because nowadays, after fishing for so long and I fished like the 10-inch mag draft, the 10-inch Huddleston, understanding that even a 4-pounder will throw back a bait like this with absolute ease. I feel like you just collapse it. You got that one jig hook. It does just fine. I know the guys up in NorCal like to fish just a standard jig hook on there, and it works for them. You just got to keep pressure on them. It's kind of just like fishing a beast hook in a way, where you got to keep pressure on them, keep them down as much as you possibly can, and get them in the boat. If you guys want to do the Butch Brown rig up here in the front, absolutely go for it. I know a lot of guys have tried wire and fluorocarbon and mono and braid and so many different ways to rig it. It just depends on what you guys feel comfortable with and what you guys have confidence in. But yeah, there's so many different ways to actually rig the Huddleston. So if you guys want a completely different but really cool Butch Brown rig, I will also leave a video somewhere up here. Mike Gilbert, a Working Class Zero, he made a video where he actually drills a hole down here. He puts like an RC tube. He does the Butch Brown rig, but what his Butch Brown rig does is instead of trying to use this foam up here to keep the bait, which I never thought it worked that great, especially for me, what his does is his stays in there a lot easier just because it like pops out and it's sturdy enough to when you cast it, it doesn't just come off. So I'll leave a link to that video up there if you guys wanted to check it out. Another tip for you guys when it comes down to the Huddleston and, well, really any other soft bait out there, is what a lot of guys will do is they will actually boil the Huddleston. And what they literally mean by that is they're legit boiling it. They'll get a pot, they'll boil some water, and they'll put the bait inside of the pot and they'll let it sit in there for 10 to 30 seconds at a time. Heats up the plastic of the bait, and what that does is it just softens the bait. So what a lot of guys will tell you is if you hold a soft bait like this, you will see how much movement it will have in the water. Now after boiling it, the bait will be able to actually have a little more movement. It's a little bit softer, and it does a few things. One, it gets rid of the plastic smell. Two, it just softens up the bait so it gives off a harder kick, and you can really creep that thing. If you're into that, you can creep it, and that tail is still gonna kick. Once you boil it and you really get this plastic to soften up, that tail is gonna kick even at super slow speeds. And that's where this bait has always shined for a lot of guys, that you can fish this thing super slow and it'll still swim, it'll still kick, and that's where a lot of guys will get a lot of bites. So try boiling your baits. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it will definitely soften up your baits. And if you end up storing the bait wrong and the tail is kind of bent, kind of funky and weird, and it doesn't swim right, try boiling it. And then once you've boiled it and softened it up, hang it upside down from like the eye of the bait, so it's straight down, up and down, and normally it will just straighten out the tail by itself and the bait will swim good again. So that's kind of just a tip for getting a softer bait. And if you have one that's got kind of a bent tail, you can still save it just by boiling it. Don't boil it too long though, it'll probably like melt. Other than that, that is the 8-inch Huddleston. By far probably the most iconic swim bait out there in the market. So many guys, whether or not they're into swim baits or they want to get into swim baits or they just want to catch big bass, the Huddleston has always just been a staple, a go-to throughout all of the years that it's been around. I know there's places out there that they've never seen the Huddleston and they're just waiting to kind of be discovered by some guy that actually gives a bait of this size a shot to see if he can catch a giant bass from those areas. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be a place that stocks trout. I mean, I've caught an 8-inch Huddleston fish out of just random urban golf courses and they eat it. It's really just about the profile and the swim, and they obviously make different colors in the Huddleston. They have shad, they got perch, so they've got different colors, so it's not really that big of a deal. So if you guys are fishing places that the bass feed on gizzard shad, or if they feed on white bass or anything like that, get a shad profile. It's gonna be killer. So it's not just specifically for trout stock lakes, but it's really a bait that gets bit really all over the country and all over the world. So if you guys have never checked them out, I'd try it out and see what's up. At least try maybe the Hud 68. It's a great bait by Huddleston. Alright guys, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you guys could subscribe to the channel, that'd mean a lot to us. If you guys have any questions about the Huddleston and fishing it and all that other good stuff, leave a comment down below. I'll try and answer as many as I possibly can. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. Peace out.